Thanks for choosing Happy Times and Places. It's a podcast where I sit somebody down and make them watch Doctor Who, and then I say to them, you will tell me every good thing about it. You will tell me. You will tell me. You will tell me. But before I hear what they tell me, I have to guess what they've chosen.
My name is David Quantick. I'm a comedy writer, mostly. I write other things and I do broadcasting. The story I am nominating is Genesis of the Daleks.
Well, welcome everybody to episode 4 of Genesis of the Daleks. If you want to raise a lot of money for charity, you can perhaps run some sort of sweepstake or contributory box for how many times I say cassette, which I've been doing with annoying regularity. It's probably one of only a list of annoying things that I do. But anyway, this is what this is. You're listening. It's your fault. I am Toby. I'm going to try and accentuate the positive of every episode of Doctor Who that I watch with the help of a friend of mine, or in this case, not a friend, but a writer whose work I've long admired, who has come up with 7 things that he likes about Genesis of the Daleks, 1 per episode and 1 bonus. So let's see what it is he likes about episode 4, and I'll see if what I like is the same as what he likes. And here we go. I'm paused between episodes, so I'm going to press play. You can press select episode or whatever it is that you do in 3, 2, 1. And there we go. David chose Davros last week. There's things I could have chosen without even thinking about it. Something neither does or neither himself will have to be. The fact that you could choose. Tom Baker is on such great form. David's already chosen Harry Sullivan. Elizabeth Sladen is fantastic in this as well. I love the way that there's a bit where he greets them in the cave and she goes "whoa" when they hug. I love that bit. She's full of lovely, nice little touches. There's so much of this. It's a grim story of genocide in which the Doctor doesn't actually win. Lots of good people die, and the environment is a pretty grim and unforgiving one. And yet, for me, it is comfort. Isn't it odd how we are, fairy tales that we read, we are comforted by containable violence. That must, because we're not, I'm not turned on by the violence in this, although I do get a rush from the drama, and actually then I suppose the nastier it is, the more of a kick I get. So maybe I do get turned on by the violence, but I'm not a violent person. I find real life violence extremely distasteful and distressing. So it must be that it is containable. That we have, I suppose we all have violent urges that kick in when we try to protect our own. I could be violent to protect my children or my loved ones. So I think we all have it within us. So it's interesting when we watch it. What is this? How? And I find it extraordinary that I grew up on war films. And now I look back at that and go, and I mentioned the Commando magazines and things like that. The people being entertained by those movies were very often the people that lived through it. My granddad, I remember talking to him about the war, and in the way that a bloody child does. Oh, that's very clever, because the takeoff was actually done by the camera moving there. That was a neat little trick. Bit of stock footage there, we'll forgive that. And I was stupidly saying to my granddad, did you ever kill anybody? Oh, and he just, shrugged it off, went, well, wouldn't talk about it. That's the cliffhanger. I left Harry and Sarah in there. And actually, I think the explosions were maybe slightly different on the cassette. But that's very well done. Well done, Tom Georgeson, looking up, because they're underground in a sort of bunker situation. Poor old Ronson doesn't get much to do. I've got a feeling that actually was the cliffhanger supposed to be a bit later, and that's why Ronson should really have been killed in episode 3, because the cliffhanger was to come after Davros's speech after Ronson is exterminated, or did I dream that? I don't know. This is not a factual podcast. This is me saying what I see, but I have a vague memory of that. When I get to, and I remember, I know that they wanted the deaths to be really gruesome in this, so people sort of fly about and die quite slowly in this, and I think that's because David Maloney wanted the deaths to be as agonising as possible, so they're quite drawn out, and the poor old actors, now I think you'd make it shocking by a sort of zap and they're dead, but did I dream that was supposed to be the cliffhanger? I think I did. But anyway, look it up. Sometimes I'm just a catalyst for further study. If an element of doubt creeps in, I will say so, I promise you. But what was I talking about? Yeah, the sort of World War II dramas or films. I mean, were legion. And yes, as I said, that embarrassing moment where I interrogated my granddad, who didn't really talk about. Probably, I've rubbed shoulders there. Had eaten breakfast with somebody who probably saw things that I would never, that would have caused me lasting damage. We talk about our feelings now, and that's quite right, and we encourage that, and we encourage us to talk about our vulnerabilities and the things that cause us anxiety. And I get anxious phoning people up. I get anxious getting on the bus. Well, how anxious would I have been at Dunkirk? That's it. I mean, it seems monstrous to me that my anxiety is indulged when that generation had to bottle theirs up. But that is, of course, progress. And just because they had to deal with things in the way that they did doesn't mean that we don't learn. But it does make me feel slightly guilty sometimes. But the idea that those very terrible situations where very terrible things had happened, where the man who worked in your local shoe shop had seen his mate's face burn off on a ship or whatever, terrible things. And people just continued. But then that's what they went to see at the cinema. And that's what was in drama. I mean, World War II dominated. And here it is now inveigling its way into the sort of generally more fantastical or safer or cozier world of Doctor Who. And it's wrong to say that Doctor Who is cozy, of course, because it's there to frighten. That's beautiful, that tracking shot on Davros and Garman, who wasn't in episode 3. That's interesting, because you think of the sort of triumvirate of characters of Davros, Nyder, and Garman. They're the kind of they're the three central players on Skaro. Although he is a Khaled. Anyway, don't go off track because the first you hear from Garman actually in the cassette is later than this. He hasn't been in it at this point. You just hear, a trap was being laid for Garman, says the Doctor, even though we don't actually know who he is at that point. But it fits in. And it does sound like somebody says Lisa. I always remember that, listening to it on the cassette. You just heard that. So here are the Thals. I think they all die in sort of agony as well. And David Maloney's only got 2 corridors in which to do it. But I remember he's got a thing about glasses, because a lot of the Thals have glasses as well. And Betan. I love Betan. Harriet Philpin, who has never done an interview about Doctor Who. I think she lives in Ireland. I think a couple of people have tracked her down, but she's in Blake's 7 episode as well, isn't she? But I like Betan. She's also the wife of the secret lemonade drinker in the R. Whites commercial. Listeners from abroad might not know that we have a famous advert where for Our White's Lemonade, where a man in his pajamas sings a song about being I'm a secret lemonade drinker, and he goes to Our White's, and it's Our White's Lemonade, and his wife, who catches him drinking the lemonade in secret, is Harriet Philpin, and they redid it recently. I say recently, it was probably 15 years ago, with the same actors and used, and I think they put a thing in the paper saying they couldn't find the wife, and Harriet Philpin's son read it and got in touch with her, and she did the advert. And the other guy, the secret lemonade drink himself, is Julian Chagrin. And you may think, well, that's got nothing to do with Doctor Who, and certainly nothing to do with Genesis of the Daleks. It has, because Julian Chagrin is the son of Francis Chagrin, who did the incidental music for the Dalek invasion of Earth. So it all ties together, and all of that is true. To divert you from the fact that I wasn't sure, I just made something up about a different cliffhanger. So yes, Betan pops in. This is the first we've seen of her, isn't she? But she becomes a key character. I like the way that the characters sort of come in and out of the action with ease. We've only just met her, but now she's a really important part of the story, and she's not going to spend much time with the Doctor, but she's gonna go off and do her thing and activate her part of the plot so that she's very useful at the end. And actually, Severin doesn't actually do an awful lot, does he? That's a great shot, because we're scuppered by the studio, and I often think of the studio stuff here as being an apology for the brilliant film stuff. And we've got no Daleks on film, of course, but the lighting there, it's no attempt. Well, it maybe is an attempt, but there's no way it's going to rationalise with the actual outside that we saw. But that night sky and that angle on that Dalek and the way the light glistened on it, Duncan Brown's lighting again. And the lighting in these caves is very good as well, although no amount of light can hide a polystyrene rock. But I've just been thinking about Severin. I loved him as a character when I watched this as a kid. That's a whoa! I love Sarah's little whoa. I don't think that's going to be my favourite thing in the episode, but I do love it, and I've always remembered it. But yes, I remember loving Severin because he's benign and he's nice and he's sweet, but he doesn't do an awful lot. He's there to represent the Mutos. But I think it's nice, considering the Daleks, sort of the Khaled's Nazi policy of, rejecting imperfects, which ties in with, aspects of disability and stuff like that. But certainly more so with their superiority and racial purity, that grotesque idea. That actually Severin is, a gentle and kind creature, even though he's, shambling and gnarled and might well have smoky feet. I love, why would it have occurred to anybody setting something in the future that we wouldn't use clipboards anymore? But we don't really, do we? And I like the character of Carvel here, played by Tom Georgeson. I remember reading the book going, I really like this Carvel guy, and he's not on the cassette, but it turns out he is. And that's quite controversial. It's not controversial, it's just got a trivial cast fact that has always slightly bothered me that I will, I'm sure, bore you with when we get to it. He's got a sort of gentle quality, Garman. He's good casting, Dennis Chinnery. Not as good casting as Peter Miles, though, who is just perfect. What always amuses me about Peter Miles is that, although obviously neither is wearing a wig, so it's not. But I love it on the Doctor of the Silurians DVD, where Peter Miles in the documentary, recorded in the present day, has more hair than Peter Miles in the clips from 30 years previously. Although that's very sad. And I talk as a bald man myself. Do you know what I mean? I'm a balding man. I'm clinging on to my last bits of hair for dear life. But I think Stephen Yardley's his hair's on the last gasp of clinging to his head by the time he comes back to Doctor Who in Vengeance on Varos as Arak, having been had he been Ken Masters by that point? Don't know, don't care. Thank you. Yeah, I love Sarah. I do love Sarah. I wanted to marry Elizabeth Sladen or Sarah Jane Smith or both. And I think she's got such a lovely quality. She's got such the right instincts for how to pitch it. And she peppers her performance full of beautiful moments. We love this TARDIS crew. And I do feel a bit sorry for Harry in that his days were seemingly numbered as soon as he was cast, really. And I don't think he becomes redundant with the Doctor. I actually think they complement each other quite nicely, and sometimes antagonistically. And Peter Miles is totally convincing here. I like to think that prior to this, you'd have gone, well, there's no way that Nyder would turn on Davros. And now that he's doing this, you think, oh, actually, he might. Testament to his fine performance. So, yes, as I mentioned last episode, the idea of a disfigured person, Davros, being equated with bad. Well, they're all very good plot reasons why he would be so. But I am sympathetic to the idea that often, and particularly in this period of Doctor Who, which I love, Magnus Greel, there's a cliffhanger reveal that he's got a melted face. Sharaz Jek is he a villain? I mean, he's certainly a villain that we feel sorry for, but certainly his motivation is that he's been scalded by mud and he wants to get back at the person that's done it, and that's why he has to hide away, and that's why he has to wear a mask. And I love Robert Holmes's writing, and I think he deals in the, for want of a better word, grotesque in order to give dimensions to his characters and stuff. But it's interesting how we've sort of slightly moved sideways from that now, or should be. But again, it's odd, isn't it? Because the 1970s wasn't free of people who had suffered disfigurements. Again, people in World War II were perilously injured. But I know, but we know also that disabled people were hidden away and not represented, which is why I still find it I do find it bizarre. There was a children's BBC presenter who had a she's called Carrie somebody, and she's got a disability with her arm that means it's shorter, and there were complaints, parents complaining that their children were being exposed to somebody who looks a bit different. I find the idea that people would complain about that, even if they thought it, but to actually complain about it and behave like the wounded party. But anyway, I love this scene. Is a glorious scene because it has two of the best lines ever, and they both come from Peter Miles. There's also on the cassette "Ka-ching pound" when Garman gets knocked out. It's like there's a sort of squeal, but is it a squeak from his boot? I don't know, but there's certainly a sort of but he's going to say three people now: Carville, Frenton and Parrin. Never meet Frenton and Parrin. Poor old Carville is thank you. That's what I wanted to know. I love that line. Isn't it just a glorious thing? And Davros coming out of the darkness. This is so shadowy and conspiratorial. This is the Doctor Who equivalent of the X-Files of Line of Duty. And this is the squeak. What is it? Is that Garman's noise, or is that just his boot going on the floor? It's very helium-esque. Shall I kill him? Oh, there's three brilliant lines in this, because doesn't he also have a "What do you want done with this"? Is that in this scene as well? Oh, Nyder is brilliant, but it's the way that he doesn't enjoy the "Shall I kill him." It's more like he's a child playing with an insect, a sort of a lofty disinterest that's sort of almost more chilling because it's so sort of casual and not indulged. Oh, I love Peter Miles, and if he was played by a more famous actor, I think we'd be trumpeting this from the rooftops. But because he's just a sort of character actor who played similar sorts of parts for a lot of his career, and is probably best known for Doctor Who, although he had the seasons with the RSC. Certainly when he's a Stanley to the Richard III of Anthony Sher is no small fry, But I think because we most closely associate him with Doctor Who, Doctor. No, he says welcome back, and then on the cassette he also says Doctor, but I think they must have lifted Doctor from another scene because, of course, on audio we can't see that that's the Doctor. So it's welcome back, Doctor, and it says and it just sounds like they're fading out of the scene or whatever, but it's because the Doctor is from somewhere else. I'm so sorry if you're listening to this podcast and you've never heard the Genesis of the Daleks cassette, or it's also on vinyl. So it's. Davros is so good, and yes, I like the idea that he's like, oh yeah, I can buy a story, and also I like the idea that he's so proud of his Daleks, and the fact that he and the Doctor can make the same observations but from totally different perspectives. The Doctor's saying make them a force for good, and he's going, well, they are a force for good. We just have different different visions of what is good, and it's good writing that actually both sides have utterly plausible motivation, and they're both great intellects. And I mean, I know that the Doctor is a lofty alien, but he has the qualities that make us human. What mistakes do they make? I like when he gets interrogatory, he becomes all Dalek-y, and Baker's vicious riposte, his stubbornness is suffused with venom. There's a venomous streak to the Doctor that the quiet danger that Rob Shearman talks about, but the danger isn't always quiet. You are afflicted with a conscience. Now, some of that writing, Davros could just go for out and out villain, and I think that the texture that he's given is to the serial's credit. But I like these outside characters that, again, the six episodes affords us, but we like them. They're nicely played. Julian Chagrin, the lemonade husband of Harriet Philpin, has another Doctor Who connection as well. Is that his brother Nicholas Chagrin, his late brother now, sadly, is Quillam in Vengeance on Varos. So it all ties together in this stupid brain of mine. I remember this so well from the from the repeats when it was watched, because I really felt that they were in pain and they were being tortured, and they're just rigged up to silly helmet things, and there's a bit of a sound effect, but it's convincingly pulled off by everybody. But I remember being really shocked by this cliffhanger and going, really, is that the cliffhanger? Because I hadn't expected it to come at all, because it's a really odd cliffhanger, but I absolutely love it. And really, this has no bearing on the story that we're watching, that the Doctor, gives away. Oh, she's so good at this stuff. The Doctor gives away, future Doctor Who storylines, some of which you go, I don't remember that one. Is that from an annual? But I love the fact that Davros is very clipped and formal about it. But he gets more and more sort of imposing and scary and vicious. But it starts from a very look at that. and it sort of comes out of nowhere, and it's, as I say, it's not really relevant to this story in the long run and in the end of it, but it's such a dramatic moment. But I'm not sure what I make of it, because I know that this part of it sort of really goes nowhere. He tells them, and he sort of goes, "Oh well, I've affected the future a little bit," and but it's almost like the cutaway to that moment is quite. It's almost like an imposed cliffhanger, and yet I really like it, and I'm struggling to articulate why. I won't tell you because I'm not sure I can. I know Carville got credited above Garman then. Again, we had a school teacher, an English teacher, whose nickname was Spode. David Spode, I notice, is the designer. But I never worked out what Spode actually meant in terms of the nickname. It's a very onomatopoeic name. There is Spode. So if Spode is a rude thing, I do apologise. I don't know what it means. He was really called Michael Thomas, but we called him Spode for some reason. And always when I see the name David Spode, I've never seen him interviewed, and I think this is his only one he's designed, which is odd because it's such a famous story, and it's pretty well designed. I mean, that Thal massacre, that's basically 2 corridors. Well done, everybody. David Maloney's done a great job with this, hasn't he? So, can my favourite thing be? Thank you. That's what I wanted to know. I think it might have to be. I want to mention Duncan Brown's lighting at some point, because that's superb, and I thought that was very good in that scene, and that Dalek on the against the sky, and the shadows of the Daleks around the corridors. Duncan Brown's lighting. I might save that for my bonus thing, but I think the lighting is, spoiler alert, the lighting is definitely going to get a look. But I cannot resist, can I? Well, can I have a pair of lines? The thank you, that's what I wanted to know. And shall I kill him? A clip of Niders. Which, and if he says Nider as well, I think I get a point for that. I don't think he will. Oh, it doesn't matter. So I will say neither, but particularly that scene with Garman, and particularly those 2 lines. So, David Quantick, what is your singular favourite thing about episode 4?
In episode 4, as the show progresses, I am very much enjoying it. And so just a quick throw in, the Mark III travel machine. I love that idea. I love the idea that they are concealing the nature of the Daleks. Even though you could just say Dalek, people go, yeah, I don't know what that is. The Mark III travel machine, an obvious reference to World War I armoured fighting vehicles being called tanks. Yes, it is.
Ah, interesting. I hadn't considered that. Of course, the war iconography that I talked about there, the Mark III travel machine, and it's wonderfully euphemistic. But again, of course, it's nice, of course, that when we first meet the creature, it is not even called the very name that we know it by. And I think, again, because this story is so familiar, and because we know what we now know about the Daleks, that wheeze, that idea of going, well, yeah, we're going to go to a time when the first time you see a Dalek, they're not even called Daleks. Again, I think it perhaps would have helped if they'd been able to, have a much more primitive model. They could have had a lot of fun with that, and actually spread the story over a few weeks or months where the different models come out. But there's no way that would really be possible under these circumstances. Stories weren't told particularly in that way at Doctor Who at that time. I think you'd struggle to do it now, but that is a nod to that. The idea that these are pre-Dalek Daleks, and that of course adds to the inexorable sort of doom-laden outcome of this, because the Daleks do prosper. This is where the Daleks had a chance to not exist, and that's we've never had that in Doctor Who before, which is why it's such a great idea for a story. And isn't Genesis a brilliant word as well? Such an evocative and portentous, and of course it's got biblical dimensions to it, which of course makes it seem so much more impressive. But we're at a point, the only point, where the Daleks' existence there would be no such thing as Daleks. This is so good. I'm loving this. I'm supposed to be going to bed. Can I do another episode of Genesis of the Daleks? I don't know. I'm going to decide after I've said goodbye. But I appreciate David Quantick's input there. So I will say to you, David, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Until next time.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
I had an itch and I had to scratch it, and yes, I was right. The cliffhanger to part 3 was originally when Davros says the ultimate conqueror of the universe, the Dalek. So that was supposed to be the cliffhanger, but it was altered for timing reasons.
And yeah, it says here, shamelessly plug anything you have coming up or your online presence. Well, I'm on Twitter, and on Twitter I'll be talking about my forthcoming quiz book, Quantick's Quite Difficult Quiz Book, which contains, I hope, many, many Doctor Who related rounds, including Doctor Who villain or musical instrument. I'm sure you can guess the crossover there. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest this time around is David Quantick, who can be found on Twitter at Quantick, and his quiz book is out around about the time that you're listening to this. Check it out. These podcasts are only possible thanks to the kindness of patrons, who include John McClay, Rossa McPhillips, Stuart Mitchell, Nathan Moore, Matthew Newton, Dave Owen, Melvin Pena, Keith Perry, Jonathan Potter, Dylan Rees, John Rivers, Jim Sankster, Matt Sawyer, Keith Say, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Nick Temple, Sabrina Tirabassi, Reynard Toombs, Apollo C. Vermouth, Gary Wales, Adam Westwood, Rich Wiggins, Michael Williams, Andrew Willis, and Stephen White. The music for these podcasts is by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson. You too can be a patron by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. You get bonus material, exclusive material, early releases, and sort of access where we can sort of chat and do other things. I also put out little goodies as and when, but you get to listen to most of the podcasts at least 3 or 4 months before now, except for this one actually, which I've just released to tie in with David's book. So this one isn't quite the same as the others, but you don't need to know that. You just need to go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. There is a treasure trove there of all sorts of Doctor Who podcast me related stuff, if that is to your taste. It costs as little as £3 a month, and you can even get a 10% discount on top of that if you sign up for a whole year. I'm not allowed to keep you or go to your house, but it means that you're definitely committed to a year. But I'm churning out, for patrons, you get 3 releases at least per week. So hopefully plenty to justify your investment. If you can't do the monthly thing or don't want to, that's fine. Ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke is a place where you can do a sort of one-off donation if you're feeling generous or you particularly like something that I've done, or I just look and sound particularly hungry or needy. Or what costs you nothing is you could go to Apple or to wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Podbean, wherever, Spotify, and give these 5-star ratings and some nice lines of review. That just helps separate this Doctor Who podcast from what is an overcrowded market, and it means more people will be aware, and then my labours will not have been in vain. I also do comedy where sometimes I don't mention Doctor Who at all, but people still seem to like it, you know. I'm not all just TARDISes and Daleks and Pat Gormans. So if you want a bit of that, you can go to Excess Malarkey Comedy Club in Manchester every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Excess Malarkey. Search for it online and you'll find the website with details of upcoming shows. Or you could go to twitch.tv/excess malarkey, because Manchester is at a specific geographical location. But Excess Malarkey is not, because we do a monthly online show, 8 p.m. on twitch.tv/excess malarkey, which is absolutely free, although we do ask for donations for those of you that can. And you get me and at least 3 comics from the international circuit doing our stuff in a very good-natured show. And it might expose you to some comedians you've not seen before, or it will give you access to some internationally renowned comedians who don't normally do such cheap or free gigs, because people like doing ours, because it's a nice place to be. It is a happy time and place, and it's available to you from the comfort of your own home. One thing I haven't mentioned during these commentaries is that I remember somebody wrote to Doctor Who magazine complaining about the edited nature of repeats, and I think they were specifically referring to this because I remember them referring to it as Genesises of the Daleks, which I thought was great, saying, are we going to have to put up with all sorts of edited stories? And they did do a list, which are all quite funny, but the only one I remember is the Scissorites, and even then, the idea of reading a sort of jokey version of the Censorites, and the idea that that might be repeated even in edited form, even though actually the whole letter was only a joke, was a sort of exciting way of touching the past. So those are the days when a pretend edited substandard version of the Censorites being moted in a joke letter was just really exciting. We really were trying desperately to get back to the past, weren't we? Was it ever thus? But top marks to whoever it was who corresponded with Doctor Who magazine and coined the title Genesises of the Daleks. I like it. It was a while ago now, so they might be 100 years old.